What do you remember when you hear this? Or this? Yes, they are ringtone advertisement for Nestle and Selecta ice cream products. In short, when we heard those tones or ringtones, we thought of ice cream. We associated those ringtones or tones with ice cream. Ever wondered why or how we associated them with ice cream in the first place? This situation illustrates classical conditioning. Hi, I'm Karen, a nurse by profession, and we are Group 9. In this video, we are going to help you get to know Ivan Pavlov and to discuss and to dig deeper about classical conditioning so that in the future, you may understand on how or why people tend to associate a stimuli, a sound, a smell, or a picture with specific emotion and reaction.
Ivan Petrovich Pavlov was born on September 14, 1849 at Ryazan, Russia. Pavlov was the first son of a priest and the grandson of a sexton. Spent his youth in Ryazan in central Russia. There, he attended a church school and theological seminary where his seminary teachers impressed him by their devotion to imparting knowledge. In 1870, he abandoned his theological studies to enter the University of St. Petersburg, where he studied chemistry and physiology. After receiving the master's degree at the Imperial Medical Academy in St. Petersburg, graduating in 1879 and completing his dissertation in 1883, he studied during 1884 to 86 in Germany under the direction of the cardiovascular physiologist Carl Ludwig and the gastrointestinal physiologist Rudolf Heidenheim.
So here's the secret of getting fit, getting good grades, and becoming a confident public speaker. Classical conditioning. Discovered by Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov in the early 1900s. Ivan Pavlov collected dog saliva. He discovered that dogs salivate not only in response to food, but in response to things that associated to food. In a series of experiments, Pavlov conditioned dogs to respond to neutral stimulus, like a monotone, a tone, or a light bulb. From these experiments, we understand the process of classical conditioning to have the following parts. What are these parts exactly? By looking into Pavlov's experimental process. First, Pavlov repeatedly exposed the dogs to two stimuli together. This is the unconditional stimulus because even without the conditioning process, it induces a response. It makes the dogs drool. This is the conditional stimulus because it needs the help of the conditioning process to create a response. Nothing about 1000 Hz is inherently delicious, but with conditioning, it induces the same response as unconditional stimulus. As the two stimuli are presented together repeatedly, the dogs undergo a process known as acquisition, where the dogs will learn to associate the tone with food, and the response of drooling becomes not only a response to food, but becomes a response to the tone itself. So, you just have to play the beep and make the dogs drool.
Hello everyone, this is Randy Pagon, and I will discuss the Pavlov classical conditioning a dog experiment. The most famous example of classical conditioning was Pavlov's experiment with dogs, who salivated in response with a bell tone. Pavlov showed that when a bell was sounded each time the dog was fed, the dog learned to associate the sound with the presentation of the food. So, as what we can see, before conditioning, the food is an unconditioned stimulus. So, every time na makita ng dog ang food, nagkakaroon siya ng unconditioned response, which means nagkakakos siya ng salivation, lumalabas yung salivation niya. And second, before conditioning, the bell is a neutral stimulus. So, every time na marinig ng dog ang bell, wala siyang response. There is no conditioned response. Kaya hindi lumalabas yung salivation niya. So, when the third conditioning, Pavlov studied that the food and the bell, every time na pinapakita ni Pavlov ang food at sinasabayan niya yung bell, lumalabas yung salivation ng dog. Nagkakaroon siya ng unconditioned response. So every time na sinasabay ang food at saka yung ring ng bell, nagkakaroon ng unconditional response. Lumalabas yung salivation niya. With the fourth conditioning, the bell is a conditioned stimulus. So every time na marinig ng dog ang bell, lumalabas yung salivation niya. So parang nasiset na sa mind niya na food yun. Which means conditioned response. But the very clear, strong point that was shown of Pavlov's study that unrelated behavior can trigger similar responses. Kasi wala namang connection yung bell sa paglabas ng salivation. Nagkakaroon lang ito ng connection kapag pinagsabay yung ring ng bell at saka food. Parang nasiset ng dog yung akala niya yung bell, yun na yung food. Pavlov recognized that the neutral stimulus associate with a reflex response through conditioning.
And now we have invited a celebrity guest, TJ the Explorer from Cagayan de Oro, to demonstrate a simple example of classical conditioning.
1, 2, ready, go. Very good.
Hello everyone, my name is Carl Martin Pagidopan and I will be discussing about high order conditioning. Now, under high order conditioning, it's actually part of classical conditioning in which a second stimulus paired with the first stimulus would create or produce a conditioned response. Now, it might be confusing, but we'll make it easy for you guys. So let's proceed. Now imagine this particular scenario. What do you think when you hear this sound? Doesn't it sound familiar? Well, every time you hear this sound, I bet you are going to associate it with ice cream. Now, every time this song would come up, we all have this culture, this collective understanding that a person who is selling ice cream is about to arrive. And every time we hear this music, we tend to crave or salivate or maglaway for ice cream. Now, remove the ice cream and you only hear the music, it's still going to generate salivation. You're going to think of the music, you're going to hear the music, it's still enough for you to be able to crave for ice cream. That is the rule of classical conditioning. But here's the question though. What happens if we put higher order conditioning in this particular scenario? Now, imagine this again. You hear this music. and then you realize that every time the ice cream man and the music is played, it always plays at 4:30 in the afternoon. Now, what happens to higher order conditioning there? Even if there is no ice cream and music, the fact that it's 4:30 alone, you are going to be craving for ice cream. Now, in higher order conditioning, 4:30 is the second stimulus, while the first conditioned stimulus was the ice cream music. Both of these are going to generate a response of craving for ice cream. Now, let's apply this particular scenario, this high order conditioning in Pavlov's dog experiment. Now, you already know the experiment of Pavlov, right? The bell, the food, and the dog. You give the dog the food, you ring the bell, and the dog is going to salivate for the food. What happens when you remove the food? You're going to ring the bell, and the dog is still going to salivate, right? Now, let's see what happens if we put high order conditioning in this experiment. Notice that aside from ringing the bell, I have the tendency to push the red button in order to turn on the red light. Now, there are two stimulants, the ringing of the bell and the red light, every time I give my dog food. Remove the food, the bell and the light is still going to cause salivation. Remove the bell, the red light alone is still going to cause salivation. Now see what happened there. In an ordinary classical conditioning setup, there is only one stimulus, which is the bell, and the conditioned response, which is salivating or maglaway. But in high order conditioning, there are two stimulants, which is first, the bell ringing, and second, the red light. Remove the food, remove the bell, and the second stimulus is still going to cause salivation.
In classical conditioning, there is what we call extinction and spontaneous recovery. Extinction occurs when conditioned stimulus is being introduced or without being paired with the unconditioned stimulus. For example, Pavlov repeatedly exposed the dogs to the bell sound without introducing the food. So over time, the dogs will not respond or salivate with the bell sound anymore. This is what we call extinction. But it doesn't mean that the learned behavior is gone forever. There is what we call spontaneous recovery, where it is the sudden return of the previously extinct behavior.